Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at the book of Matthew.
Oh, great.
But through a very specific lens.
Yeah.
We're going to be using RERichmond's Tree of Life Bible translation.
I like it.
And I'm really excited about this one because I think Richmond's approach is really, really interesting. And, he really emphasizes this idea of spiritual awareness. Have you heard of that?
I have, yeah.
And this concept that we all have this spark of the divine within us.
Right. It's not this, kind of external thing that's separate from us.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. It's like we are that.
Yeah.
It's who we are at our core.
And so how do you think that shapes Richmond's approach to interpreting these biblical texts? Because I know a lot of people are probably familiar with the book of Matthew.
Sure.
But to look at it through this very specific lens, it's going to be interesting to see what he comes up with.
Yeah, he really challenges us to shift our perspective. Instead of seeing ourselves as these humans who just happen to have a spiritual side, like he flips it and says, no, we are spiritual beings. He weaves that concept throughout all of his interpretations of Matthew.
So, visible spirit sounds kind of abstract. What does that mean for us, like on a practical level?
I think of it this way. Your spirit, your essence, is like this light that shines through you.
Okay.
And it affects everything. It affects how you interact with the world.
Oh, wow.
Even the simplest actions become expressions of your spirit.
So it's not just, something that we cultivate during our prayer time or, when we go to church or something like that. It's really, it's like woven into the fabric of our everyday lives.
Absolutely. And this idea of visible spirit, it leads to some really interesting interpretations of familiar passages. Like, for example, in Matthew 5.45.
Okay.
You have that phrase that says that you may be the fathers of your father in you.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And traditionally, people might interpret that as like, becoming like God.
Right.
But Richmond goes deeper.
Okay, what does he say?
He suggests that it's about recognizing that inherent divinity within us, that we are already connected to that source. It's not about striving to become something we're not, but about realizing who we truly are.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's like saying we're not separate from God.
Right.
But that we are part of that divine whole.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that understanding, that really shapes how he approaches other key passages. Like, take, for instance, the Lord's Prayer.
Okay. Yeah. Everybody knows the Lord's Prayer. I had to memorize it as a kid.
Yeah, exactly.
So what does Richmond do with that? I'm curious.
So he offers this new translation that emphasizes our existing oneness with God. And, for example, the phrase, forgive us our debts.
Right, yeah.
It becomes, our righteousness was caused to be from the foundation.
So instead of asking for forgiveness, we're acknowledging an inherent righteousness.
Right.
That's a huge difference.
It is a huge difference. And if you really think about it, when you fundamentally believe that you are already righteous, your entire approach to prayer changes.
Yeah, less about begging for things and more about aligning yourself with the truth that's already there.
Exactly. And it ties into this whole idea of visible spirit, right? If our true nature is divine, then that inherent righteousness is always within us.
The Lord's Prayer, then, according to Richmond, is less about pleading for something we lack.
Yeah.
And more about remembering who we truly are.
You're getting it.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that connection to the divine and aligning ourselves with it.
I'm starting to see how this visible spirit idea kind of weaves its way through all these different interpretations. It's like a new lens to view the Bible through.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And, this lens leads to some interesting perspectives on some of Jesus's most famous teachings. Like, for example, the one, seek ye first the kingdom of God from Matthew 6.33.
Right, right. Yeah, what does Richmond say about finding that kingdom of God? Because so many people, they think of it as heaven or like something far off. But Richmond, I have a feeling he takes it in a different direction.
He does. He flips that on its head.
Yeah.
He suggests that if we are this visible spirit,
right,
then the kingdom of God isn't out there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's within us.
So it's not about searching for something external,
Yeah.
but uncovering something that's already present.
That's it.
Okay.
Seeking the kingdom of God becomes this inward journey, a process of discovering that inner divinity.
So that really challenges that traditional interpretation of,
It does.
That kingdom of God being something way off in the distance that we have to strive for.
Right, exactly.
So if the kingdom of God is within, then what does it really mean to truly follow Jesus's teachings?
Well, Richmond points to Matthew 7.21, where Jesus says it's not enough to just call yourself a Christian. He suggests it's about aligning your actions with and this is a mouthful, the decision, determination, and decree of God.
Oh my gosh.
Which, is a fancy way of saying living in a way that reflects your true spiritual nature.
Okay. So true discipleship isn't just about words, but really about embodying that awareness in your everyday life.
Exactly.
That's a pretty tall order.
It is a tall order.
Yeah.
And he points out that this can be a challenging path.
Right.
Especially because it often, kind of clashes with more established religious views.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true of anytime someone comes along and offers kind of like a new or different way of seeing things, people tend to resist.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially when it comes to really deeply held beliefs. Speaking of challenging beliefs, I know Richmond has kind of a unique interpretation of Matthew 9.12, LA 13, where Jesus talks about compassion over sacrifice.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a really key passage for Richmond. He sees this passage as supporting his whole idea that we are inherently worthy and don't need to appease God through rituals or sacrifices.
Okay.
He really sees Jesus' message as being about awakening people to their true identity as righteous beings.
So again, it's about recognizing that wholeness and worthiness within ourselves rather than seeking it externally.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think what's interesting is that he draws a parallel between the Pharisees' resistance to Jesus' message and the resistance that a lot of unconventional spiritual teachings face today.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like history repeating itself, even in the realm of spiritual thought.
Right.
Now, I know Richmond also has some interesting things to say about Matthew 11.2830, where Jesus offers rest to those who are weary. And in his translation, he uses the words refresh and repose instead of just rest. Why do you think he does that?
I think he's really emphasizing the idea that finding true rest is an inner experience. It's a state of peace and tranquility that comes from recognizing our union with God.
So it's not about just like physical relaxation, but more about finding that inner stillness and connection.
Yeah, precisely.
With the divine.
And he talks about being yoked with God.
Yeah.
Not in like a burdensome way, but as an image of this intimate and effortless connection. It's about realizing that union and finding that peace within it.
Like you can relax into your relationship with the divine.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not about striving or earning God's favor, but just recognizing that connection and letting it bring you peace.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, this has been really eye-opening so far, just hearing, the way that he takes these familiar passages and puts a different spin on them.
Yeah.
And then there's this idea of being open to new ways of seeing things, questioning our assumptions.
Right.
That seems to be central to Richmond's approach. And it's something that he highlights in his interpretation of Matthew 13.13-15, where Jesus explains why he speaks in parables.
Right.
What does Richmond say about the parables? They always seemed a little bit mysterious to me.
Yeah, I think he believes that Jesus used parables because people were often so blinded by their preconceived notions and their attachment to, religious dogma. And he even uses this phrase, religiously infected conscious awareness, to describe how our minds can become, I guess you could say, closed off to new ways of seeing things.
So sometimes our existing beliefs, our existing kind of framework, it can prevent us from understanding these deeper spiritual truths.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and he really encourages us to approach spiritual teachings with an open mind. Be willing to question our assumptions and, to see things from a fresh perspective.
Yeah, like we might be missing the deeper meaning if we're too attached to our own interpretation.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, like, what are our own potential blind spots when it comes to understanding the Bible or even just life in general?
It's a great question to consider.
Yeah.
And it's something that he explores further in his interpretation of the rock upon which Jesus will build his church. But that's a conversation for our next segment.
Oh, okay. A little bit of a cliffhanger. I like it.
Yes.
All right. Well, we'll come back to that in just a moment.
So, it's fascinating how Richmond connects this whole idea of open-mindedness to that passage in Matthew 16.18, where Jesus calls Peter the rock.
Right.
The rock upon which he will build his church.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that passage because, some people interpret it very literally to mean that, Peter was like the first pope.
Right, the foundation of the church.
The foundation of the church. What does Richmond say?
He sees it as a reference to a massive revelation.
Okay.
A truth that has the potential to transform, not just individuals, but the whole world.
So for Richmond, Peter represents this revelation more than being the focus himself.
Exactly. It's not about a specific person or even a religious institution. He believes that rock refers to an inner awakening that's available to everyone. It's about connecting with that visible spirit within.
Yeah, that is such a different way of looking at it.
It is.
Makes me think about like the power of personal revelation. Yeah.
And how transformative that can be when you experience it firsthand.
That reminds me of something else Richmond talks about, the importance of approaching spiritual matters with a sense of humility
Okay.
and childlike wonder. He brings this up in his interpretation of Matthew 18.3, where Jesus says we need to become like little children
Right.
to enter the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, what does Richmond think Jesus meant by that? I always kind of found that passage a little bit puzzling.
He suggests that Jesus is calling for us to shed our egos, our need to be right, and all of those preconceived notions that we tend to cling to. It's about approaching spiritual experiences with an open heart and mind, like a child experiencing something new for the first time.
So letting go of our need to have all the answers and just being open to the mystery and wonder of the spiritual journey.
Yes, and I think embracing that sense of curiosity and openness is really essential to uncovering the truth that Richmond believes is at the heart of Jesus' teachings. It's about allowing ourselves to be guided by that visible spirit within. This is giving me so much to think about in terms of my own spiritual practices. Like I've never considered the idea that letting go of my need to be right could actually help me connect more deeply with my spirituality.
It's a powerful shift in perspective,
It is.
isn't it?
Yeah.
And it ties into another passage that Richmond finds significant, Matthew 18.10, where Jesus warns against despising those who seem insignificant.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. He calls them pastors who are aware of God's presence within. I've always been curious about how to interpret that. Who are those pastors that he's talking about?
Richmond believes it's about recognizing and respecting those who demonstrate true spiritual awareness, regardless of their outward appearance or social standing. They might not hold official positions in a church,
Right.
but their lives reflect a deep connection to the divine.
So it's about looking beyond titles and appearances
Yeah.
to see that divine spark in everyone,
Exactly.
recognizing that anyone can be a teacher or guide on the spiritual path.
You got it. It's a reminder that true spirituality isn't about outward signs of piety,
Right.
but about how we live and interact with the world.
Wow, this deep dive into the book of Matthew has been so eye-opening. It's amazing how Richmond brings together all these different passages
Right.
to create such a coherent and inspiring message. It's making me want to go back and reread the entire book with his interpretations in mind.
I think that's the beauty of exploring spiritual texts through different lenses.
Yeah.
It allows us to uncover new layers of meaning,
Right.
find fresh inspiration.
Absolutely. And speaking of inspiring passages, I'm curious to hear what Richmond has to say about Matthew 24.13,
What?
where it talks about experiencing wholeness, immortality in both spirit and body.
Wow.
What a powerful concept.
It is a powerful concept.
Yeah.
And Richmond's interpretation of it just beautifully ties back to his overall message.
Okay.
He sees this passage as a promise
Mm.
of the transformed state of being that's possible through spiritual awakening.
So it's not just about an afterlife, but about experiencing that wholeness here and now.
Exactly. It's about recognizing our inherent divinity as visible spirit and living from that place of awareness. It's about tapping into the potential for transformation that exists within each of us.
Wow, what an inspiring message to end on.
Yeah.
Richmond's interpretations have given me so much to think about. It's like he's taken these familiar passages and breathed new life into them.
He definitely encourages us to re-examine our assumptions and approach the Bible with fresh eyes.
That's what I love about these deep dives. They make me think critically and consider different perspectives.
And ultimately, that's what helps us grow and deepen our understanding.
It does.
Isn't it? Always questioning, always exploring.
Speaking of exploring, Richmond's interpretation of Jesus calling Peter the Rock really resonated with me. It makes me wonder, what are some other unconventional interpretations of biblical passages that challenge those traditional views? Maybe that's something we can look into for our next deep dive.
Oh, that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
There are so many fascinating interpretations out there just waiting to be explored.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into Matthew. So I've been thinking about this idea of, experiencing wholeness in both spirit and body. That passage in Matthew 24.13.
Right.
What's Richmond's take on that?
This is where I think his whole vision of visible spirit really comes together. He sees that passage as a promise, a glimpse of the transformed state of being that's possible when we experience spiritual awakening.
So it's not about, waiting for heaven or some kind of afterlife.
Yeah.
It's about experiencing that wholeness right here, right now.
You got it. Recognizing that our true nature is spirit and that we're not limited by, these physical bodies.
Right.
And when we really live from that place of awareness, then we can start to experience, a whole different reality. A state of being that he describes as immortality in both spirit and body.
It's almost like we can tap into this dimension of ourselves.
Right.
That's beyond those limitations of, time and space.
Exactly. It's about realizing our full potential as, spiritual beings. He believes that potential is available to everyone.
Right.
Regardless of, where they come from or what they believe.
That's pretty powerful.
It is.
It makes me wonder, if we truly embrace this idea of being visible spirit, how would that change our approach to life, our relationships, the world around us? What do you think?
It's a profound question. Imagine recognizing that spark of the divine, not only within yourself, but in everyone you meet.
Oh, wow.
How would that shift your interactions? How would that change, the way you make decisions or the actions that you take?
It's like we'd be seeing the world through this whole new lens.
Yeah.
One that kind of emphasizes the interconnectedness of everything, the inherent worth of every being.
Exactly. And I think it's that shift in perspective that leads to more compassion.
Right.
More understanding. Ultimately, just a more peaceful and harmonious way of being in the world.
I love that. That vision is really, really beautiful. And I think, especially important in the world today.
I agree. And Richmond's work really offers this powerful reminder that true transformation, it starts within.
Yeah.
And when we recognize our own inherent divinity, it naturally extends outward.
Yeah.
Influencing, not only our own lives, but our relationships and the world around us.
This deep dive has been so insightful. I feel like Richmond's interpretations have really challenged me to think differently about the book of Matthew, about my own spiritual journey.
That's wonderful.
And I feel like I have a whole new set of tools, to explore these concepts further.
I'm so glad to hear that. And I really encourage you, to continue to delve into these ideas, to reread these passages with Richmond's lens in mind, and just see what comes up for you. See how they resonate with your own experiences.
Yeah, I think I will. This has been such a rich conversation. I feel like I've gained a deeper understanding of the book of Matthew. And maybe more importantly, a renewed sense of, my own potential.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And I hope our listeners feel the same. If you're intrigued by what you've heard today, I encourage you to seek out Roy E. Richmond's Tree of Life Bible translations and, continue your own deep dive into the book of Matthew. See what you discover.
Thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration. We hope it sparked your curiosity and inspired you to, keep seeking, questioning, diving deep into the mysteries of the Bible and your own spiritual understanding.
Keep exploring.
Until next time.